For every professional sports franchise across the board, having a plan is step one to achieving success at whatever level you're striving for. When you look at all of the most successful franchises in sports throughout history, the one common theme is that they have all had competent front offices that guided them in a direction with a purpose, so that down the line, however far that may be, they can see their work come into fruition with success on the court or field or whatever sport they're playing. In the NBA, this especially applies as we look at all of the most recent champions like the Warriors, Raptors, and Lakers, and they all proved that beyond the court, their front office made strong move after strong move to put them in that position. Then when you look at the opposite end of the standings, you tend to see the opposite of this. Some teams that are struggling right now can still be well-run organizations as long as they have a plan for the future, but the teams coming up short time and time again are the ones without any real direction, which brings us to the topic of today's video. Today, we'll be discussing the Detroit Pistons and why, in my opinion, they are the most directionless franchise in the NBA right now. Nothing about their plans over the last few years, nor any moves that they've made recently or in their future, make any sense whatsoever, and I'll get into all of this in the video. Before we start though, it turns out about 68% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, because not only does it help out a ton, but I would also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Ever since the era of Pistons basketball featuring guys like Chauncey Billups, Ben Wallace, Rip Hamilton, Rasheed Wallace, and Tayshaun Prince, the Pistons have been without a true identity, and for the last decade or so have been floating in the limbo zone of the league. They've had a few playoff appearances since then, coming in 2016 and 2019, but in both of those years, they got swept in the first round, never truly being a playoff team with a real chance of making noise. A decade is a long time to either put together a strong enough team to at least manage to compete for a deep playoff push once, or rebuild and focus on development for the future, but throughout the entirety of that span, this team has done neither of those things. They always gave off the impression that they were trying to be a playoff contender, but more often than not they came up short of that goal, landing in the later end of the lottery. In 2018, they finally got aggressive by going out and trading for Blake Griffin, hoping that pairing him with star center Andre Drummond would form a dominant frontcourt duo that would prove to be too much for opposing big men, but a plethora of injuries, amongst other things, resulted in that plan never coming into fruition, and as a result, this past season the Pistons decided they had enough. Late last season, the team traded away center Andre Drummond to the Cavaliers, and the purpose of this move was, at least this was what I thought at the time, that they would now be focusing on a rebuild, because clearly their plans of playoff contention were unrealistic with the current makeup of their team. When they did this, I actually applauded them because this is exactly the direction that they need to go in, but since then they've let me down tremendously, showing me, as you see in the title of the video, that they are the most directionless franchise in the NBA right now. Starting on the night of the NBA draft, I will admit that I was a huge fan of a lot of the moves that they made. They started things off 7th overall when they selected Killian Hayes, who I believe is a very promising young point guard, and as long as he gets the opportunity to develop over time, will be a good pick in the long run. They then had another first-round pick where they selected Isaiah Stewart 16th overall, a strong center with a good inside game, and finally, they made a pretty big draft night trade, shipping out Luke Kennard in a three-team deal with the Clippers and Nets, and in return received picks such as the 19th overall pick where they selected Saddiq Bey, another very strong pick for them that is a good wing player. These kinds of moves, while bringing in so much youth, really had me fooled into believing that the Pistons were looking to the future and their focus was on the young guys, but then free agency came around and proved that notion false. When Drummond got traded away last season, it opened up to the opportunity for his backup Christian Wood to step into a larger role as a starter, and once that happened, he emerged rapidly. Wood showed off superb talent in spurts throughout the year off the bench, but as a starter, he really came into his own at another level, averaging 23 points and 10 rebounds per game in that span. Wood then entered free agency this summer, and many assumed that the Pistons would reward him by re-signing him to a new contract, but when they let him walk and sign instead with the Houston Rockets, it wasn't the end of the world. Ultimately, teams that are focusing on rebuilding shouldn't be spending large amounts of money in long-term deals on good players, because the focus is on development and their youth for the future, right? Well, that's what you would think, but the Pistons had other ideas. Free agency for the Pistons started off hot and head-scratching with some moves, and as the period went on more and more, things never really seemed to click. First, they signed center Mason Plumlee to a 3-year contract worth $25 million, which, quite frankly, is a ton of money to spend on a player of his caliber. He's a career backup who is very limited offensively, and while he plays his role well within reason, is now being paid a hefty amount and will likely be the team's starting center. The Pistons then followed that up by signing Jeremy Grant to a 3-year contract worth $60 million, as he was one of the hottest commodities on the market, and when he chose to leave the Denver Nuggets for the Pistons, it legitimately shocked almost everyone. Look, Jeremy Grant absolutely earned this payday after developing into a highly valuable wing player on both ends of the floor in his time in Denver, and his reasoning for wanting to go to a team where he'll get a bigger role is also valid, but the reason why this is a bad move isn't from the perspective of Grant, it's from the perspective of the Pistons. Like, why exactly did they make this signing? What is the goal here exactly? Are they rebuilding or are they not? Grant is exactly the kind of player that makes teams that are competing to win big better, as his versatility both as a scorer, defender, and rebounder help any rotation that he's a part of, but the Pistons just aren't very good, and signing him to come into this situation doesn't change that. Plus, he's locked in for 3 years now, which now limits the team's flexibility to make more moves, especially when you consider Blake Griffin and his monster contract are still on the team. Which, speaking of, is another aspect that makes the Pistons' plans even more difficult, because now the front court is jam-packed with players. You could use the fact that Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose still being on the team means that the Pistons are actually looking to make a push for a playoff spot in the East, but let's be real, several other Eastern Conference teams have improved ahead of them, and that goal is just flat out unrealistic. Blake is well past his prime and always injured, and Rose will probably be someone teams look to trade for at the trade deadline, so I wouldn't anticipate him being there very long. And so, after all of this, the Pistons are still hovering in the limbo zone of the league, handing out bad contracts and limiting their ability to grow something good for the future. They're now relying on Jeremy Grant to be a go-to guy in the lineup, while young players like Sekou Doumbouya and Saddiq Bey get less opportunity. Mason Plumlee is now in the mix, taking away minutes from newly drafted Isaiah Stewart, and they traded away Luke Kennard to focus on a rebuild that isn't happening. The Pistons continually max out their ability to compete as an, at best, low-seeded playoff team, and they do this while simultaneously raising their floor to the point where they won't finish low enough in the standings to get a top draft pick. Things are not going well over there, and their path, quite frankly, seems directionless. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think of the Pistons' future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.